The Hollywood Golden Age turned a dusty California suburb into the world's most powerful dream factory. Tiny studios tucked behind palm trees learned how to turn simple scripts into bigger-than-life experiences and ship them to living rooms around the world. Whenever you stayed up late to see what happens next, you were riding the wave of a system that paired smart storytelling with smart marketing. Think of it like a garage band that becomes a stadium act. First ideas, then stars, then brands. We'll show how everyday things, radio shows, vaudeville, and the urge for escape pushed filmmakers to dream bigger. By the end, you'll see why those black and white classics still feel timeless and how their choices echo in every big film you watch today. Stick around and you'll get a clear map of how a dusty suburb grew into the global dream factory and what that means for your next movie night. The Great Escape from Edison. Why early filmmakers fled the East Coast and Thomas Edison's patent lawyers for the sunny, lawless West. Motion picture makers on the East Coast faced tight control from patent power and a web of lawyers who could lock up equipment and ideas. That pressure pushed many toward a different coast. The West looked like a place where sunlight met opportunity, where ideas could move faster than lawsuits. The escape wasn't just about dodging court fights. It was about the chance to try, fail, and learn in a warmer climate and with fewer legal roadblocks. So crews hit the road with cameras, reels, and a stubborn belief that the best stories could grow in California's open spaces. The West offered rainless days and broad skies that let crews shoot with fewer artificial tricks. There was room to build tiny stages, outdoor sets, and improvised labs in repurposed spaces. Rents felt kinder and land felt cheaper, and suddenly you could buy a small plot, set up a makeshift studio, and keep moving without someone claiming your gear or your ideas at every turn. It was a practical choice as much as a romantic one, a chance to test concepts with less friction and more hands-on trial and error. Behind the scenes, a patent regime kept a tight choke on much of the early film world. A centralized system of cameras, projectors, and distribution routes funneled control through a few big hands, making independent work expensive or nearly impossible to reach audiences without permission. The move west let filmmakers bypass some of that bottleneck, or at least dodge the heaviest gatekeepers, and it opened doors to theaters that were eager for fresh voices. A crew could swap crowded studio spaces for sun-soaked desert days, trading the smell of hot lights for the scent of pine and dust as they rolled. In California, independence bred improvisation and speed. People learned to tell stories with what they had, not what a rulebook dictated, and the landscape itself became a character in the film. A caravan of makers stitched together makeshift studios, borrowed equipment, and a shared hunger to show audiences something new. The result wasn't just about escape. It was about building a culture where experimentation felt possible, where more voices could be heard, and where a film could travel from crate to theater without a legal detour slowing it down. The Great Escape wasn't simply a relocation. It was the seed of a larger shift toward a creative ecosystem that would redefine how movies were made and shared. Birth of the studio system, the rise of the Big Five, MGM, Paramount, Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, RKO, and their total control over stars. Power in Hollywood didn't come from a lone genius, but from a tightly wound, multi-layered machine. The Big Five, MGM, Paramount, Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, and RKO, built strength by owning the means of making and moving pictures. They controlled the producer's room, the distribution routes, and the screens themselves through owned theaters or long-running agreements. This setup turned movie making into a steady factory line. A film became not just art, but a product ready for shelves and showtimes. At the core was the star system. Actors signed long-term contracts, sometimes for years, binding them to one studio slate of films. The studio decided which roles they'd play, who they'd work with, and how their image would be sold to the public. If a star balked at a script or asked for more money, the studio could slow walk or replace them. Publicists choreographed wardrobes, press interviews, and even private lives. Moral clauses kept behavior in line. Block booking was a handy trick. Theaters often bought a package of films to guarantee a hit, which meant a movie without the star might still ride the same contract. Studios also tightly controlled release patterns, making sure audiences saw a familiar face in a steady stream. Backlots grew into expansive campuses with crews, costumes, and crafts ready to roll, all under one corporate roof. Directors and writers worked inside the system and often found themselves writing within the studio's rules. This system built careers and profits in equal measure, but it also stifled independence. Stars could be locked into scripts and schedules they hadn't chosen. Legal challenges and social shifts would eventually loosen the grip, though the imprint of the studio system lingered in how films were imagined. Even today, it's a useful reminder of how power can organize art into a machine. The invention of the movie star, how studios manufactured icons like Marilyn Monroe and Humphrey Bogart, controlling their lives and images. Studios built movie stars as brands, engineering every visible moment through a sprawling publicity machine that decided not just what you saw on screen, but what you believed about the person who appeared there. They did this with contracts. Marilyn Monroe is a classic case, molded from Norma Jean into a luminous blonde persona by the studio's photographers, stylists, and publicists who choreographed her public appearances, including the way she shimmered in films like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. What you saw was calculated. She became the dumb blonde in the public eye, a role the machine kept reloading across songs, gowns, and punchy punchlines in film and promotional magazines. The method wasn't limited to what happened on set. It extended to who she appeared with, what she spoke about, and even when she was seen off camera. Privately, her life was a carefully annotated script. The marriage to DiMaggio, the staged fashion events, the publicity tours, all fed into a narrative that boosted ticket sales while masking the real person behind the glitter. That's how the publicity wheel kept turning. Behind the glamour, the studio's publicists kept notes on tone, jokes, and even which questions were allowed in interviews. Humphrey Bogart tells a parallel but equally staged story, one where a tough guy persona was curated through roles in films like The Maltese Falcon and Casablanca, as well as carefully managed interviews and collaborations. The badge of authenticity was a carefully edited arc Warner Brothers placed him in a slate of hard-edged films that built the image, while press materials describe him as the reliable everyman who spoke plainly and shot straight. That image paid. His partnership with Lauren Bacall on screen and off became a marketing windfall, turning their real romance into a modern fairy tale that drew audiences to theaters and kept the star's name in headlines. In this system, the movie star wasn't just a person. They were a product with a turnover rate measured by box office returns and renewed contracts. The price tag was privacy. Yet the machine wasn't all-powerful. Actors sometimes pushed back, whispered about their own interests, and sailed off in a partly autonomous direction, while audiences caught glimmers of a real person behind the glossy veneer. And sometimes the biggest stars leveraged the machine to guide their own legends. Technicolor dreams. The transition from black and white to the vibrant, hyperreal colors that redefine cinema. Technicolor's 3-strip camera captured color by splitting light into 3 separate film negatives, recording red, green, and blue on distinct strips. The result was brightness and depth unseen in earlier color experiments. Audiences stepped into cinema that felt almost tactile, where colors were saturated beyond everyday life. For studios, this demanded bigger budgets and new workflows, and makeup, lighting, and costumes had to be designed to survive the glowing, dye transfer prints. It wasn't a quick change, but when it clicked, the world looked different. 2 color systems couldn't reproduce the full spectrum, so reds and greens often looked muddy. 3-strip opened a wider range, letting emeralds, sapphire blues, and fiery crimsons glow with purpose. Production teams began using color scripts, a planning tool that mapped scenes to color moods long before rolling the camera. The Wizard of Ounce became a touchstone, with Kansas scenes in a muted, sepia-like palette and the Land of Ounce bursting in luminous Technicolor. That contrast showed what color could do for mood and fantasy, turning simple scenes into visual events. Lighting had to be stronger, as colors could wash out in bright sun or glare. Costumes and sets were chosen to hold up under the dye transfer process, favoring bold contrasts and clear silhouettes. Makeup needed to read well on full color, avoiding pale tones that vanished under the glow of the screens. The dye transfer printing offered rich pigments and better permanence, but it demanded careful color balancing throughout production. Directors learned to plan shots with color in mind, often coordinating palettes to create visual rhythm and emotional cues. By the late 1930s and after, color was no longer a luxury but a language of cinema. The glow of Technicolor helped shape how stories looked and felt on screen, guiding designers, cinematographers, and audiences toward a more immersive, hyperreal world. Its influence lingered in modern color grading and in the bold, saturated look that still evokes classic Hollywood. The dream of cinema in full color didn't fade. It simply set a new standard for what a movie could be when it wore color like a signature. The Hays Code era, a decade of strict censorship, how Hollywood learned to tell stories within rigid moral boundaries. The Hays Code created a rulebook that dictated what could and could not be shown on screen. The rules came from the industry itself, backed by a body that censored scripts and approved films before release. In practice, this meant romance and crime were filtered through a moral lens, with villains punished and virtue rewarded. Scenes of intimacy were trimmed, suggestive dialogue had to be softened, and audacious ideas were tucked away behind clever subtext. Audiences still felt the drama, but sometimes with a touch of starch and a smile when the heroes did the right thing. Filmmakers learned to tell powerful stories without showing everything people wanted. Dialogue became a tool for wit and implication rather than blunt exposition. Directors used lighting, framing, and pacing to imply danger or romance that the code would not permit to be shown overtly. Kisses were kept brief, and a kiss could speak volumes through pauses, laughter, and the audience's own imagination. This pushed clever writing and careful editing to the front, and many movies earned their charm from subtext. The era also nudged genres into new shapes. The screwball comedy bloomed on the idea of misunderstandings at odds with propriety, all ending in a neat moral rap. Problem pictures tackled social issues from poverty to class with a sanitized lens that kept things hopeful. Westerns, noirs, and dramas found ways to explore risk through suggestive situations rather than explicit scenes. Stars learned to carry films with charisma and restraint, becoming the public face of a carefully curated moral code. The result was a distinctive Hollywood voice that could reach wide audiences while guarding reputations. Over time, the boundaries eased, not because the stories became less interesting, but because new audiences demanded more nuance. This push led to changes in how films were approved and, eventually, to a new rating system that allowed broader expression. Meanwhile, filmmakers kept a habit of crafting clever, hopeful endings that made even tough topics feel doable. In the end, the era trained storytellers to balance desire with responsibility, and that balancing act echoed through countless classics that still feel modern. The sound revolution, the chaotic shift from silent films to talkies that destroyed careers and created new legends. The moment sound was captured on film, cinema slid into a new and louder era. Voices that could not be heard before now carried jokes, secrets, and stage directions straight to the audience. It was a scramble, a rush to build sound stages, wiring, and new microphones as if they were inventing a speaking engine. The jazz singer is often cited as the marker, but the shift was messier than a single moment. It felt like someone turned on a microphone in a busy cafe, and suddenly everyone could hear every quirk. Some careers vanished as if a curtain fell mid-performance. Silent charisma could not compensate for a voice that cracked under a studio microphone, or a heavy accent that confused American audiences. In life, a confident smile can sell a line in person, but on a brittle microphone it betrays you. Directors learned to screen dialects and to coach line readings the way coaches tune a guitar. Charlie Chaplin, a giant of silent cinema, paused and weighed the idea of sound, then forged ahead later with a bold but different kind of film. New legends rose from the noise. Audiences loved the quick back and forth, much the way neighbors trade zingers at a block party. Singers with acting chops found a natural home on the talkies. The Broadway melody showed that a story could be carried by conversation and song, not just pantomime. Stars who could project warmth through a microphone and hold a scene with a clever line could become icons overnight. The craft of making films changed as much as the scripts did. Sound required technicians to design rooms that kept air and echo in check, and it forced actors to time jokes for the exact pause after a line. It wasn't subtle. Some scenes had to be rewritten to accommodate dialogue, others to allow for a moment of silence. Cameras stayed in soundproof booths, turning actors into performers who spoke to a wall. The era trained audiences to listen as a primary way of understanding a character, and it rewarded those with voice and timing. Humor, romance, and drama found new rhythms, and the film industry gently turned to a voice-driven storytelling style that would define Hollywood for decades. War and propaganda. How Hollywood joined the World War II effort, creating patriotic films and training videos for the military. Hollywood studios didn't just entertain during the war. They became co-pilots in the national effort. The government set up the Office of War Information to steer messages and called on filmmakers to explain the conflict to audiences at home, while keeping morale high. Training films rode alongside features, turning cinema into a practical tool. Patriotic shorts, newsreels, and longer documentaries rolled out through theaters, clubs, and training halls, shaping what people thought and how they felt. The aim was simple in tone yet wide in reach: make sense of the war, encourage support, and prepare soldiers for the realities of battle. One of the most influential efforts was Why We Fight, guided by Capra and produced with the Army and the OWI. These films stitched together real footage from battlefronts with explanations about fascism, aggression, and the stakes of the conflict. The language was direct, the stories clear, and the tone sober. Soldiers studying these films understood not just how weapons worked, but why victory mattered. The approach also traveled to civilian audiences, helping to explain government goals and rallying support for the war at home. Training films turned the cinema into a classroom. The Army's film units, sometimes working with major studios, produced clips that demonstrated gun safety, troop movement, and emergency procedures. Directors and technicians shared equipment, lighting tricks, and storytelling skill to make instructions memorable. Disney contributed animated pieces that explained air power and logistics in accessible ways. Humor slipped in when appropriate, as a light touch to stress points without breaking the serious message. Satirical cartoons like Der Fuhrer's face offered a punchy reminder of the enemy, while Disney's victory through air power argued the case for strategic bombing and tried to shape public thinking about military priorities. On the home front, newsreels and patriotic shorts kept war updates visible between feature films. These pieces framed daily life around rationing, manufacturing, and support for troops. War bonds, recruitment drives, and community efforts drew energy from the screen, turning cinema into a rallying point. Tension existed between government guidance and artistic freedom, yet the collaboration produced material that felt both cinematic and instructional. The legacy is a Hollywood that learned to blend storytelling craft with strategic purpose, turning popular entertainment into a practical force for wartime effort. The architecture of illusion, the creation of massive backlots, building Rome, Paris, and New York in the middle of California. On the sun-warmed backlots of Southern California, studios stitched together entire urban dreams, turning empty acres into sprawling streets. The illusion started with careful planning. Rows of facades rose in deliberate patterns, with arches, storefronts, and balconies that suggested centuries of street life while the real structure lay hidden beneath, ready to change with the scene. Everything was built to be walked, filmed, and taken apart. Rome came to life with columns, marble-like textures, and stone arcades that could catch sunlight in a way that felt ancient yet immediate. Painted skies supplied dramatic weather. A fountain might spit a predictable spray, and a pebble-paved plank could soften footsteps into a memory of centuries, while concealed rigs let camera crews tilt and pan without a tremor. Actors learned to walk through a forum that existed only in plaster. Paris was a neat trick of stone facades, iron balconies, and chalk blue skies that hung above a pretend river. Cafes wore chalkboard menus and leaking awnings that looked perfectly French from a few angles. Digging feet into faux cobbles, the crew could capture the bustle of a boulevard while a water tank supplied a wisp of Seine, and a laser-like lamp gave the right glow without scorching the actors. Neighbors' windows let in extra light jokes and the occasional stray laugh. New York was stacked behind steel and glass illusions, tall facades angled to feel like a canyon of skyscrapers. Perspective tricks made a few stories look endless. Fire escapes snagged on the fake brick, street lamps cast long shadows, and the sound of distant sirens came from speakers, adding atmosphere without hauling in a city truck. An alley could feel crowded even when only a handful stood in front of the camera. These backlots were practical theaters of deception, built to dissolve when the cut happened and the next location demanded a new world. Yet they trained audiences to suspend disbelief and accept the image as real. The architecture of illusion lives in painted cornices, in the grain of a fake street, and in the way a single frame can carry you from Rome to Paris to New York without ever leaving California. The Red Scare, the dark era of McCarthyism and the blacklist that ruined the lives of many talented writers and directors. Fear of communist influence swept through American culture, and Hollywood faced a microscope that exposed every whisper. Tension ran high. A government agency grilled writers, directors, and others about their beliefs, and people watched with uneasy fascination. The result was a blacklist that hid many talents behind a heavy curtain. Among the most famous victims were the Hollywood 10, a group of screenwriters and a director who refused to name colleagues. Some paid with jail time for refusing questions. Others simply vanished from the credits. The machinery extended far beyond a single hearing. Studios stopped hiring anyone who showed even a hint of political doubt, and rumors did more damage than a bad review. A barrage of lists circulated. Red channels named dozens of people as suspected communists, and the industry learned to tread carefully. Names appeared in trade papers. Some kept working under pseudonyms so their talent wouldn't go entirely to waste. Others drifted toward television or the stage, where the spotlight was kinder or at least different. Dalton Trumbo became the best-known example. He kept writing, sometimes under assumed names, while his real name sat off to the side like a secret. Ring Lardner Jr. faced the threat of silence, yet he persisted and later earned recognition with a major award. Elia Kazan's choice to name split audiences then and still sparks debate. Many others vanished from the credits and paid heavy personal costs, their lives reshaped by fear. The blacklist changed how people spoke about art and loyalty. Over time, the era faded, but its marks remained on the film world and on American culture. It raised tough questions about civil liberties, loyalty, and where art ends and politics begins. Some careers were revived, some faced a long quiet period, and the industry learned to navigate political pressure with more care. The debates still echo today. Fear can push people to police themselves. Talent, however, has a stubborn way of finding a moment to breathe again. The end of an era. How the rise of television and new legal rulings eventually broke the monopoly of the giant studios. The Paramount decision in 1948 forced studios to sell their theatre chains and ended block booking. That hit the system hard. It peeled away the guaranteed pipeline from producer to screen and began shifting power toward others. The result was a market open to new players and to tactics that didn't rely on theatre domination. Audiences kept showing up, but now they had options. Meanwhile, television climbed out of living room novelty and became a steady rival. People gathered around the set as a family ritual. The couch became the new front row, and the TV guide was king. Advertisers followed, pouring money into shows that could reach millions in a single evening. The cinema, once the main stage, faced a savvy new competitor with a quicker grip on the culture. And video on demand was still decades away, so timing mattered. With doors opening, studios explored fresh ways to reach audiences. The ruling didn't kill film dreams, it redistributed them. Independent producers and companies like United Artists found room to fund and distribute movies without owning theaters. Film could travel through television screens, festival circuits, and international markets and still be a hit. This wasn't a fairy tale shift, it was a practical retooling of strategy. The old monopoly did not vanish overnight, but it dissolved enough to let new voices emerge. Creativity found new outlets, and audiences benefited from choices. Even today, the echoes of that shift appear in how films find life across cinemas, television, streaming, and global markets. That transition kept the dream factory humming, not preserving the past but remixing it. The story is less about a dying empire and more about a changing landscape where collaboration and risk win the day. That's our look at the Hollywood Golden Age, from dusty suburb mornings to a global dream factory. Studios built a steady rhythm, production lines that turned ideas into films, actors into stars, and audiences into a shared cinema culture. We watched the birth of sound, the splash of color, and the rise of musicals, noir, westerns, and romances. And yes, it was a factory in the best sense, glamorous assembly lines of stories, with popcorn and applause on top. We celebrated classics like Casablanca, Gone with the Wind, and Singing in the Rain that still echo in our language and memories. Then we connected to life, the dreams, the fame, the backstage hustle. If you've ever saved for a movie night or found yourself humming a theme after leaving the theater, you felt a slice of that golden age magic. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this trip, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you won't miss the next chapter. Tell me your favorite golden age film or moment in the comments, or share this with a friend who loves old cinema. Next, we'll pull back the curtain on how the studio system actually worked behind those famous posters, the contracts, the stars, the directors, and those little decisions that shaped what we saw. We'll dive into how the crafts, lighting, sets, music created mood, and how that legacy still shows up in today's films and streaming era.